This is going to be the first video for your semester exam review for Algebra 1, and what I'm going to be doing today is a little bit different than the videos that I normally post. I'm going to show you the pages in your interactive notebook that will help you, and then I'm going to work the corresponding questions that kind of go with that content. So if you have your interactive notebook, you need to go ahead and open it up, and you want to open to the page that's talking about the independent and dependent variables. So remember, the day that we made this page, we talked about this as kind of a cause and effect relationship. We said that your independent variable, which is your x value, is going to cause a change in your dependent variable, which is your y value. Then we brainstormed some different things that we've seen for x and y. We've seen that x is called your input, your independent variable, or your domain, and y is your output, your dependent variable, or your range. Then after we kind of talked about that, what I did was I gave you guys these cards, and I gave you a list of independent statements, and then you cut out the dependent statements and matched them to the correct independent statement, just so you could kind of see that cause and effect relationship. So when I gave you your review, the page that I gave you for that was A.1a. So this is glued into your interactive notebook, so if you'll turn to that page, we're going to just kind of go over these. I want to make sure you have the correct answers, and I'm going to point some things out to you. So we've already briefly talked about this in class, so I'm just going to go through right now and make sure that you have the correct answers. The correct answer for number 1 is A. The correct answer for number 2 was J. The correct answer for number 3 was C. The correct answer for number 4 was J. And the correct answer for number 5 was B. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of go through these problems and talk to you about some things and bring them to your attention. So if you look at number 1, it told you that we had a relation, which remember a relation is just a relationship between an input and output. So it's not necessarily a function, but we know that most relations are going to have your x and your y. So this relation exists between a sandwich shop's profit and the number of sandwiches it sells. In this relation, what is the dependent variable? Well, we know that the dependent variable, that is the one that would be our output or our y value. So if you think about this problem, this scenario, wouldn't the number of sandwiches sold depend, let me restate that. Wouldn't the profit depend on the number of sandwiches sold? So we know that we would input the number of sandwiches sold, and our output would be how much money we make. And that is why A is the correct answer. It is our dependent variable. If you look at number 2, once again, it's asking for your dependent variable, but this time it gives you an equation, which is nice because you can visually see you input values for H and your output would be M. In this particular problem, the M represents the money the student earns, which is our correct answer. For number 3, what we're trying to figure out here is there a relationship between A and B? Because it says the table shows a relation between two variables, A and B. Which statement is the best description of the relationship between them? Well, if you look at these, they're trying to figure out what are they doing to A in order to get B. And if you look, there's not really a pattern here. If you go down here from 10 to 3, you're adding 7. From 3 to 4, you're adding 1. From 4 to 7, you're adding 3. 7 to 2, you're adding 5. So we can definitely see, because these are increasing by 1, that this is definitely not linear. So the question is there a relationship that is constant throughout? Like, am I squaring 1 and adding something to it to get to 10? And then can that same pattern be applied to the number 2? Which in this case, it does not appear that there is an actual equation or function rule. This isn't a function that we could actually write a rule for. Okay, so for number 4, which of the following relations is least likely to have an independent variable and a dependent variable? So if you look at J, the number of square feet in a room and the price per square foot of carpet. Okay, so when carpet places set their prices, they don't set their prices based on how big your room is. So those are not dependent on one another. Okay, all right. For number 5, we have a graph here. You guys do a really good job with graphs. You're able to see that relationship. So if we talked about correlation when we talked about scatter plots, and we said that if our data slopes in a downward motion, that means as x is getting bigger, your y values have to be getting smaller. And that's what C says. Okay? All right. The next 2 pages that I'm going to talk to you about, these are out of your interactive notebook, and they were completed on 2 different days. So one day, we talked about the different representations of data. We talked about verbal models, equations, tables, and graphs. So this is what our foldable looked like closed, and then when we opened it up, we kind of broke this information down. Okay, so we talked about how when you're given a verbal model, you want to pull out those keywords and define your variables to write your equation. We talked about looking to see if it was linear, because that's been our focus this semester, and the different types of equations. I reminded you guys how to utilize a calculator in order to make a table of values, and then how to write your ordered pairs in order to create your graph. Okay? Then on a separate day, we talked about functions versus non-functions. And we made these little envelopes, and I gave you cards, and then we talked about how to sort those based on what does it mean to be a function. So in order to be a function, remember that's a special type of relation where each domain, which is your x, has one range, which is your y. So that was one of the things that we talked about. And then the second thing was that vertical line test. So remember, in order to pass the vertical line test, if you're looking at a graph and you draw a vertical line, it cannot touch the graph in more than one place. So we sorted our cards into functions and non-functions. And I've given you 3 examples of non-functions right here. This was one that you guys asked me about because 3 was listed twice, which made it appear that it had, one y value, but 3 is paired with 1 and 5, and that is why it is not a function. It doesn't matter if they list it twice. That's bad. We do not want x to repeat with 2 different y values. Then the 2 graphs here are an explanation. If you notice, see this vertical line right here is touching the graph in more than one place, and that is why it fails the vertical line test, and this is simply a vertical line. So we know that those are both not functions. Okay? I also encourage you guys to utilize your calculator if you were given an equation. That way you can look at the graph and see if it would pass the vertical line test. When you were doing your semester exam review for A.1b, the main thing that I can tell you, the most helpful thing that you can do is use your calculator. They are giving you the answer. The answer is somewhere within the multiple choice. So all you have to do is know how to use your calculator. You need to plug in the equation, look at the table, and see if it matches the data that they have given you. Okay, so even if they don't use x and y, you guys know that, for example, for B, that y equals 3x plus 10. And when you put that in your calculator and you hit second graph, it's going to give you a table. And you're going to go to 10 and look and see if it's paired with 40. You're going to go to 15 and see if it's paired with 55. You're going to go to 20 and see if it's paired with 70. You're going to go to 25 and see if it's paired with 85. And if it is, then you know that your answer is indeed B. And you can try all of the equations until you figure out which one it is. Okay? Same thing with number 2. You're going to put in the equation. You're going to hit graph. You're going to look for the graph that has these ordered pairs. Same thing with 3, 4, and 5. They are all exactly the same. Put the equation in, check your data. You want to look for x as -3 paired with 0, like on this one. Here, you're looking for -3 paired with 9. Basically, A.1b is, can you look at the equation and match it to the different representations? Okay, so please use your calculator. That's what it's there for. It's there to help you. In our interactive notebook, we did 2 examples where I gave you guys a verbal model, which means a word problem, and then you guys had to write your equation. You had to make a table of values and then make a graph. So it was taking those 4 representations and pulling that out. We utilized the foldable that I just talked about a couple of slides ago. So this is what you need to look at if you need extra help. Now, the nice thing is that on your semester exam and on your EOC, for the most part, you're going to have answer choices. So as long as you can just really look at those keywords and you know what they mean, then you should be able to match to the correct equation. You're not having to come up with it fresh from scratch. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the review for that part. Okay, so that was A.1c, where we matched the either word problems or tables to the actual equations. So if you look at number 1, they've given me not only a verbal model, but they've also given you a table, which is nice. So the first thing that you should notice is that the relationship here, if you're looking down your output values, is that they are increasing by $5 every week, because here these are going up by 1. So every time the weeks went up by 1, the amount went up by 5. So that should be a huge red flag to you, because we have now found that this is linear, and that's our rate of change. It's $5 for every 1 week. Okay, and they told you that here. He deposits $5 of his allowance into the account each week. Okay. The second thing that they gave you that was nice in your verbal model is it says that he opened the savings account with $50. So remember, if our starting value is $50, then they have just given you B, or your y-intercept. Okay, so this being linear is really helpful because we've spent a lot of time with that. So we're looking for the equation that's written in the form of y equals mx plus b. B is $50, and you notice here we have $50 plus your slope, or your rate of change, which is 5 per week, which is W. So that is why B is the correct answer. When the problems are linear, it should be a little relief to you. It should be a little bit easier because we've spent a lot of time on that. When they are other types of problems, it may be a little bit more challenging, okay? But you need to just key in on those keywords and go from there. I do want to jump down to number 5 and talk about it. If you have questions over 2, 3, or 4, we've gone over this gone over it in class already, but you need to be prepared to ask more questions if this is not enough for you or it didn't help you when we did it in class. So for number 5, this is an inequality, and that's why I want to talk about it. So they tell you up front that Mary has $20 to spend on art supplies, and that pencils are $1.50 per pencil, and the drawing pads are $3.50 per pad. It asks you to write the inequality that expresses the number that she can buy with the money that she has. So the first thing you want to think about is, if you only have $20, can you spend more than $20? And the answer is no. If you only have 20, then that's all you can spend. So we know that what we spend has to be less than or equal to 20. Now once you do that, that allows you to go ahead and mark off D because it's a greater than symbol, and B because that's a greater than symbol. So now you're just looking at A and C. Well, common sense should tell you that if you have 2 different objects with 2 different prices, that those prices have to be included in your equation. So it's $1.50 per pencil, so that's where the 1.5p came from, and we would add that to the cost per pad, so the $3.50 for every drawing pad, and that would tell us how much we've spent. So that is why the correct answer is C. Now that is also linear. It's a linear inequality, but it is linear, and we're utilizing the formula AX plus BY, and then in this case we're using an inequality, but equals C. Remember, when you're using standard form, you know that you're comparing 2 different objects, and we wrote that in our interactive notebook. So if you want to go back and review the 3 different forms of linear equations, that would be a great idea. Okay, I will review a few more sections in my next video, and I will see you guys in class tomorrow. Have a great evening.